Okay, we are live. So, for those listening at home, welcome to the Live from Sword Coast podcast. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon master this afternoon. So, this is a short video that I've decided to shoot in response to some questions I've had. To be honest, over the last little while, in respect to our Bound for the Barrowmaze campaign. If you are brand new to the channel, this is a campaign that we've been running for about the last, at the time of recording, last 7 months or so. We have 35 sessions posted in the game, and they in total make up about between like 75 and 100 hours of gameplay. So we've spent quite a bit of time in this campaign, and one of the questions I recently had, and I've had in the past too, in respect to the game, has been, why do you call it Barrowmaze if you're not exploring the Barrowmaze in every session? And I figured what I would do is just provide a video that explains sort of the background of where the campaign came from, what my plan was with the campaign, the reason for the shift in game systems that we were using, because the game was originally started with the Pathfinder 2nd Edition playtest, and then we transitioned over to Kevin Crawford's Scarlet Heroes, and then most recently we actually did a session using Robert Schwab's Shadow the Demon Lord. And so I'm going to talk about the shifting games. I'm going to talk about the priorities of the game too, and this speaks to actually like all of the games that I run on the channel as well. And then finally, I'll kind of circle back and talk about, well, why do I call it Barrowmaze? So first off, let's talk about the background. So that's what we're going to cover in this as yet undetermined length of a video. So the campaign, the background was at the time that we were running this. This was around the time when I had finished up. We had been running an ongoing Shadow of the Demon Lord campaign on our our Friday session. So last year, the nights that we streamed that we gamed and we streamed on the channel were every Wednesday, and then every second Friday. And every second Friday was a Shadow of the Demon Lord game, voila. Shadow of the Demon Lord is a really terrific horror fantasy game published by Robert Schwab and Schwab Entertainment. And that campaign had been going for about, 7 months or so. And then it was a story-focused thing. So we were kind of, every session would pick up from wherever the last session ended. And we had a clear kind of trajectory. There were long-term stories that were going on. It was a typical, campaign. And then what we had was people's lives started getting busier. Someone had, one of the players had his second child, which really threw his life into a bit of an uproar. And one of the players had a change in other circumstances, which made him less available. So at the time we started that particular campaign, I baked in a reason for why everyone didn't have to be there every session. We had this thing where there was a magical mishap, so every now and then certain players would just shift into kind of like the ethereal plane or some other plane. So there was an in-universe reason for why we didn't have to explain their absence and didn't have to have someone else play their characters. However, we got further on, and then we had one character death around the same time that someone else wasn't available. And that kind of derailed the momentum on that campaign. And there was a change in someone's availability during that time. They got really busy at work. So that campaign was kind of, had lost its momentum, or it staggered a bit. And then in addition to, I had just run our annual gaming marathon. And people suddenly started becoming available on Wednesdays and were not available on the regular Fridays that we played. And then the Friday campaigns, what those were an ongoing Traveler campaign. The Traveler role-playing game is a sci-fi game published by Mongoose Publishing, at least the version we were playing. And because our Wednesday game was also kind of affected, and that game was also an ongoing story campaign. We had the same players each time, same characters, and we had this story that was slowly unfolding over the course of playing that game. And so what that meant was that we suddenly had everyone's schedules were kind of up in the air. And the summer kind of saw we missed some sessions in the summertime as well, and through July. And then come August, I had another visit planned back to my hometown. And what I decided to do is get everyone together and in the interim, I had become more and more interested and had been running more games from the old school Renaissance or the OSR or old school revival, the OSR style games. So Adventure Conquer King, Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, Labyrinth Lord, and I think, what are the ones? Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Didn't actually run that one, but read it. So I'd really been interested in exploring some of those old school styles of play. And that's where enter, voila, Greg Gillespie's super cool Barrowmaze Complete. And around that time as well is when the Pathfinder 2nd Edition playtest came out, and this was this guy. And I was particularly interested in both of those things. I really loved the Barrowmaze game. I'd been really enjoying the what do you call it, the old school style of play, but I did know that my pool of players, and at that time I was only playing with people that I had been playing with for years and years and years. I didn't expand out my circle until this year. And at that time, I knew that most of my players would not be interested in playing that style of game. That's just not their bag. They like a more modern game that has a lot more, things like Pathfinder and 5th edition D&D to a degree, 4th edition D&D. Shadow of the Demon Lord was Shadow of the Demon Lord was a pretty a popular game as well too. But I wanted to try something different, and the Pathfinder 2nd edition playtest was really interesting. There was a lot of stuff in there that reminded me of 4th edition D&D, and it was the new hotness. So I was excited in seeing it get to the table. Regular players or regular viewers of the channel will know that my philosophy is that I don't really get to understand a game until I actually see it play, until I see it at the table and see how people respond to it. And with that in mind, I really wanted to get it to the table, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of tick two boxes by setting up the game to run in a Barrowmaze, because that style of game, a sandbox-based game where we just have the whole campaign is going to be about exploring the Barrowmaze and the emergent story that comes from that. That was really interesting for me. And the other thing was I intended to set up the game as what's called a West Marches style game. And if you're not familiar with that type of game, what it effectively means is that it has a rotating cast all the time. If you do a Google search for it, I should have included a link in the description because that would have been the smart thing to do. But if you do a Google search for West Marches campaign, you'll find quite a few interesting blog posts or videos about it. And what it is basically is just that it's a different group every time. Traditionally, the West Marches thing is that the players decide when they're going to schedule a session, and then they decide what their characters are going to do in that session. And I wasn't interested in having flexible dates, because I have found that for me and for my group, it's better to just have a fixed date, that this day we're playing. What we're playing, I don't know. That might change, but we're going to always be gaming on those days. I always have something for my players to play on Fridays. I always have something for them to play on Wednesdays. It may be different days, but it's always something. And what we decided to do is just modify the West Marches thing to be whoever was there that time, that's what we're going to do. And to make it work, to have a regular campaign, I guess, with it, is we decided at the end of each session, you're back in town. On our Wednesday sessions, we play 2 hours, and on our Friday sessions, we play 4. So what that meant was that you have somewhat productive Wednesday sessions sometimes, and at the beginning of the campaign, that you don't even know the entrance to the Barrowmaze. I guess maybe now would be a good time to give background for it. So if you're not familiar with the Barrowmaze, what the very, very nutshell version is that it's this sprawling mega dungeon. It's this massive. Actually, I've got a comprehensive review of the Barrowmaze complete product on my channel, and I will include a link in here. So if you want to know more detail about it, you can find it. But the nutshell or elevator pitch is that it's this sprawling dungeon that gets progressively more difficult the further you move into it. It's all one level, and you actually don't have the entrance. You need to find the entrance, and that's the first leg of the campaign. And it has a lot of the traditional stuff that you expect from traditional D&D style play, which is you're hiring hirelings, in order to get through it. You have to track your food. You have to track your torch, usage. You have to track your encumbrance. And there's other things like the random encounters are a big thing in the Barrowmaze. Traveling out there through this dangerous swamp called the Barrowmoor to get to the Barrow Mounds, which are all these like burial crypts, and then you have to try and find your way to get into the Barrowmaze. So the first kind of leg of our campaign was the guys going out there and encountering those dangers and trying to survive, losing a lot of henchmen, and That's what, once you get access to it, then you start exploring the Barrowmaze. And the way that the West Marches games are typically run is that everyone shares information. So you get this progressively sprawling map of either the area, like the area that you're exploring around you, the wilds and wilderness, or you're mapping the dungeon that you're exploring. And that seemed good. Like, given everyone's schedule, that's what, that seemed to be a good way of structuring it. Also for myself, it didn't put undue burden on me to continually write story for sessions and then at the last minute lose a player and have to me frustrated that I had a bunch of material I couldn't, that wasn't going to get used. Because as I said, like the other campaigns that we had been running, they were really story focused. I was really, it was really about the characters, and I'd be writing very personal elements into each session so that they would really kind of turn around one or two characters and giving everyone an opportunity to have some time in the spotlight. But it's tough when people cancel at the last second and you have put all that work in that's never going to see the light of day, because you're not going to be at that same point later and you don't have plans for the session. So that seemed to really, it would make for a relaxed and fun session for me to run. It also helps that the Barrowmaze product is insanely easy to run, and almost all the monsters that I would use in this I could find or easily reskin from the Pathfinder playtest bestiary. So that was the plan, and that's how we got going, and we started playing with them. And we were going to stream it like we do all of our games. And the only thing I told the players is that what you're going to do is, I don't care what you play, I don't care what your reasons are or your backstory is or whatnot. The only thing I care about is that your character has a reason for exploring the Barrowmaze. But knowing my players, and also because I like just setting things up and seeing how that goes, I also wrote up some faction rules. So my faction rules are it's a way of interacting with the environment, and you can, gain reputation with the different kind of power structures within the area. And as you do, you're able to get tangible rewards or get new contacts, and they may give you missions or whatever. And I wanted to set that up too, because I wanted there to be options. All of those factions do tie back into the Barrowmaze itself, so it still is the key focus on that. But it gave them something to do if they didn't, so that there was some variety in the campaign. The campaign wasn't only about pick up, go to the Barrowmaze, and come back. So that was the plan, and that lasted for a while. And we got to a point after playing with Pathfinder for a while where it began, at first it was a lot of fun. Like it was a really good, fun, exciting, punishing, kind of grind. It was a real challenge for the players to get out there. And the environment felt suitably terrifying for the players. But what we found was that progressively it got a little more irritating and frustrating than it did fun. And I talked to the players about it. I thought about it a lot, talked to the players about it a lot. And I kind of came to the conclusion that this type of, so there's something in video game theory called ludonarrative dissonance. And I talked about this quite a bit on my podcast. So if you want a further, discussion of this stuff, the first episode of the Dungeon Musings podcast actually deals with this at length. But the nutshell version of this, or the kind of shorthand version, is that basically the story and the themes that the Pathfinder role-playing game, the Pathfinder 2nd Edition role-playing game, plays up, how your character is important, how everything is sort of in relation to your character, how all combat is really exciting and thrilling and consequential, is kind of contrary to the themes of the Barrowmaze, which is that it's random encounters. Like, there's not a plot or a purpose behind everything. Your character isn't the most important thing in the world. It's an existing world that does not care about you one way or the other. It doesn't root for you. It doesn't try and punish you. It just is, and you interact with it. And what that found was that we were having more and more instances where those themes of every combat is consequential, everything is important, you're a special character, you're a hero, was hitting up against the random nature. So like, our random encounters were taking a dog's age. So in our 2-hour sessions, they for sure could not get to the actual Barrowmaze, or even to the mounds in a lot of cases. And in our 4-hour sessions, it was a brutal slog to get there, and they'd barely have enough resources to get in or to try and find an entrance. So what I ended up doing is, that's what led to our transition into Scarlet Heroes, because I realized that, maybe using a game system that, for one, focused the same kind of ideas that, or had a lot of the same sensibilities that the Barrowmaze assumes, which is to say that you get through combat fast. Like, not every combat has to be a consequential, big, hour and a half, 2 hour slot, epic struggle. That can be very cool, and it is really good in, or can be really good in Pathfinder, but that has to be used appropriately to service whatever overarching story that game is telling. And in Pathfinder, it's that there's only going to be a few encounters. It's not going to be continual, like, and then you fight this, and then you fight that, and then blah, blah, blah. And that's what you do in a random, encounter, a game that has random encounters. And in particular, a game that has morale. Like, not every fight has to be to the death in a older version of D&D, like Scarlet Heroes, like, basic D&D or BX D&D or Beck D&D or any of the retro clones that have come out afterwards. Whereas Pathfinder, it's really up to the DM as to when they run away. And I don't like making that decision in a sandbox game, because I want it to be random. I want I want that emergent kind of like, boy, I didn't expect those ogres to run, or wow, that reindeer or giant toad or whatever it is that you're fighting, that is sticking around a lot longer than you expected. So what we decided to do is go with Scarlet Heroes, or try Scarlet Heroes, because it was basically a traditional kind of like basic D&D style game, but you play it in a heroic mode. So we get to kind of have our cake and eat it too. We get to use all the different Barrowmaze elements and all the different stats and stuff like that, but the characters are a little more a cut above. Now, my version that I use for the campaign, if you're a regular viewer of it, you can tell that it's actually a modified version that steals elements from one of Kevin Crawford's other games, revised Stars Without Number, and I also introduced some stuff of my own, because I needed to have, there's no alchemist in Scarlet Heroes or revised Stars Without Number, whereas one of my players was playing a Pathfinder 2nd edition alchemist, so I needed to come up with that stuff. But we kludged together some rules, and that's been working really well. It's been a much more enjoyable pace for the players. It combat doesn't feel like, oh fuck, now we're not going to be able to make it through, or the time will run out and we'll find ourselves having to go back to town. They were able to still have really exciting and dramatic encounters. And I was also able to use some of the rules to set up some fun story-based stuff that would have like boss fights, which you don't get in basic D&D. So it's been really, really good since then. And the players, I think, have been universally enjoying that system much more than the Pathfinder one. And it's not to say that they like this version of the D&D rules better than the Pathfinder 2nd edition ones. It's just that for this particular game, this is a much better fit. And then recently, we also ran with Shadow the Demon Lord. And the reason for that was because, I wanted to introduce 2 of my players to that game, because I love that game for specific purposes. Like, for a certain type of campaign, it's a terrific game. And in this one, oh, my dog's pissed off. All right. Sorry, she's giving shit to someone walking by. But for this particular session, what we were doing was I wanted to play up the life of the henchman. I want to shake things up and say, hey, here's where here's what life is like in the kind of, there's an old episode of Next Generation that's called Below the Lower Decks, and it turns the kind of flips the narrative, and you look at the perspective of life on the Enterprise from the ensign's perspective, rather than the command crew that we see all the time. And I want to do something similar like that, but to do it in a fun way with a system that would support that, like make that a fun experience. And Shadow the Demon Lord does a terrific job of, making it fun to be these low-leveled, heroes in a really dangerous circumstance. So that's why we did that. And as for the actual content of the fiction, again, I said that, what you need to do is to have a character who wants to explore the Barrowmaze. But the thing is it's my intent behind running the Barrowmaze was to always set up as a sandbox. So what the players choose to do is what the game is about. The Barrowmaze is there to explore, and there's tons of rewards for doing that. But if the players are electing to shake things up and do something different, then that's fine. Like that, I'm completely fine with them doing that. And sometimes that's been exploring different mounds. And also sometimes it's a matter of just shaking things up to keep it interesting. At one part in the campaign, I grabbed an old basic D&D product called Top Ballista, and it was written by a guy named Frank Sargent. Is that right? Yeah, Frank Sargent. And so the reason I did that is because he had recently passed away, and he had written a lot of. Is it Frank's? Gee, hold on. I've got it sitting right here. I'm just gonna double check. I don't want to get the guy's name wrong. Boom. And actually, this will give me an excuse to hold up. Carl, not Frank. I knew it was wrong. So this is the product, Top Ballista. Top Ballista is a ridiculous product where, in the sense of the sensibilities, where it's a flying city designed by effectively steampunk gnomes who use biplanes to detect it, that are equipped or to defend it. There's also a bunch of other flying creatures in there, like sphinxes and these things called Nagpa, which are effectively Skeksis from the Dark Crystal. And there's gremlins, and there's harpies and pegatars and a bunch of other crazy stuff. And it's a total tonal shift from the experience in the Barrowmaze. But because Carl had passed away, I wanted to run, or got in my head, I want to do something to kind of honor the impact that he had, because this was one of my favorite products when I was a kid, and I never really got a chance to use it. So I was like, fuck it. You know what? I'm going to have Serene. There's no reason why I can't just have this flying city show up and then, have the players explore it. And then I can also take it out of the campaign when I'm done with it. So we ran about 4 sessions of that stuff. And during that time, the players really loved it. They had they got to, one of the players got to get a curse removed. They made some new contacts. And another one of the players who had been really wanting to do more of a steampunk thing, the guy playing Dave, who plays the alchemist in the campaign, he really wanted to get some engineering stuff, to do more of a steampunky kind of thing. So this was a great opportunity to introduce that stuff to the material as well. And it was fun. I had a good time with it. The players really after more recently, we've been talking about the campaign in general, and they mentioned boy, those were really fun sessions as well too. And partly that's because there was a more focused story element there. There's a little, I wrote those sessions as if they were one-shots. And then we had these 2 one-shots. But while that was happening, we did have some comments from viewers about when are we getting back to the Barrowmaze? And at the time, I was like, okay, that's right. This is about the Barrowmaze, so I really should, wrap things up, not spend too much time on this lark. And I'm now thinking that that's wrong, because especially hearing how my players felt, I had assumed my players were feeling the same way of no, we're making good progress on the Barrowmaze, so let's carry on with that and keep on going. Turns out that's not the case. They loved those sessions. They had a lot of fun with that, and they were all very, they were still open in the sense that the players didn't have to do what they could. There was story kind of breadcrumbs put down for the characters, and they could follow them if they wanted or not if they didn't want to, but they were happy to dive into those things. The option was always there to do something different, and that was fun. I mean, it was a really bunch of fun sessions, and then we finished that up, and then we got back into the overarching story. And again, at the time of recording right now, we're about 35 sessions in. We've played couple, handful of those sessions have been in Serene. A couple of them have been doing things in town. But, going back and looking at what we've actually done, it's been about 85% of the sessions have all been about the Barrowmaze. If not exploring the Barrowmaze, then they've been trying to find stuff, or exploring, trying to find the entrances to the Barrowmaze, or dealing with other related story stuff, because they're, the players have heard about this dark druid, and the one player had this crazy dream about something, and all of that stuff story-wise, spoilers, if you're a player, just plug your ears for a second, and I'll hold up my ears or hold up my hand where you can go back. But all that shit relates back to the Barrowmaze. The Barrowmaze is the source of all these problems, and they won't be dealt with without dealing with the Barrowmaze. But it was a way of adding stuff to the campaign beyond whatever's in the book. Like any kind of campaign, this is a starting point. This is a starting point for setting up what is actually going to happen at your table. And sometimes what you want to do is, in every campaign, and forgive me if this sounds really condescending, but I mean, any DM is going to want to roll with whatever the players want to do. There's not the right decision is what the players choose to do and presenting the consequences. The right decision is not do this adventure because this is what this game, this is what we're doing. There are clear benefits for my players to go and explore the Barrowmaze, and they've been making good progress in that. But sometimes there's just stuff that happens, like when on one recent trip, what ended up happening, and this is a good example of the emergent storytelling that I love about Barrowmaze, is players had a run of like 4 or 5 sessions where I kept rolling nothing on random encounters. So they're making a run out to the Barrowmaze with no problems, going down and getting a shit ton of loot, and then getting back safely with no problems whatsoever. So that happened and happened and happened. And we were joking about like, oh my God, we're so lucky now and blah, blah, blah. So sure enough, what ends up happening is in one recent session, we rolled random encounters, and I rolled trolls, and I rolled a whole lot of trolls. And the guys turfed their surprise check, which meant that the trolls surprised them. So suddenly these trolls were on them, and I rolled a random distance for the encounter, and they were right there. So suddenly this fucking mob of trolls attacks them, and for the first time in a really long time, the players had to like do a fighting retreat and get the fuck out of there. And as they're going, the players are like, I'm like, if these trolls are in the area, like, is this something that's going to be a threat to the town? And to be honest, like, okay, first off, it was a random encounter, so obviously I had no future plan for it. But now that it was an element of the story, the players prompted, and I'm like, yeah, probably. Like, yeah, these things, if they're in an area where they can eat and they can prey, then probably that's the case. So then the players were like, well, fuck it. Like, we love the people in the town. This is our home. We need to protect them and need to go out. So that prompted about 3 sessions where they were going out and exploring it. And then I added another element because we're getting up close to the end of the first season. Episode 36 is going to be the end of the season of this one. Then we're going to do the break for when the weather turns sour in the Barrowmaze and you can't explore it, which comes from the book itself. We're going to do some downtime, and then we're going to advance forward about 8 months and have them come back for season 2. So that'll be a way of us sort of, putting a parentheses, I guess, around the first kind of arc of the story. And this links in to some stuff that's happened way back in the beginning of the session, or our first sessions relating to the Barrowmaze, and it also relates to the death of the only player character who's actually died in the campaign too, who regular viewers of the channel may know that something interesting has happened to his corpse afterwards. So what that meant was that we explored, we had a couple sessions as well that kind of diverged while they were dealing with that, or there was a session where they were dealing with some of the bandits in town. But all that stuff is seeds that were set by the Barrowmaze product itself, so to say that that stuff isn't the Barrowmaze, I don't know what I can tell you is that that stuff that is all set within the confines of what's possible in the Barrowmaze complete book. It's just that it's not them exploring the Barrowmaze itself, the actual dungeon. And for long-term campaigns, I recently talked about on my podcast about designing one-shots. I presented 10 rules for designing one-shots, and there are things that I use for when I'm designing one-shots. But for ongoing campaigns, just like in shorter bits, you do need to have a flow of like rising tension, lowering tension, and also variety in order to keep the players engaged. There needs to be something more than just like, now we're going back to the Barrowmaze. At least let me rephrase that. For the guys I'm playing with, that's what I need to do. I want to have there be variety. Every session isn't pick up and go. And one of the things that I was talking about, the players, I recently talked about the players about this and said, like, how are you feeling about the campaign at this point? And it was because of thinking. So one of the things that I do, my son and I have father and son game nights about once every week or once every 2 weeks. And recently over Christmas, what we had been playing was Halo, the original Halo. We play through co-op together. And we also play, he loves the Call of Duty games, the zombie games. And I think about what we get out of playing those two things, because recently I was in the mood more for something like Halo, where we're playing through an arc, and then I was thinking about the zombie games. The zombie games are a shit ton of fun. It's great, it's exciting and whatnot, but you never win. You just postpone how you die, and that's great, because that's exactly what I want in that game when I want to have that. But if I'm looking for something where I'm feeling like, okay, we did something, we achieved a certain goal, that is something that's more of a heroic arc kind of thing, like Halo. And I have times when I enjoy one, and I have times when I enjoy the other, and I have sometimes where my favorite video game is Overwatch. I love playing Overwatch because I can drop in and play for half an hour and be done, or I can kill, 10 hours playing that. And I get out of that what I get, which is just the actual tactical experience from that. I'm not really like winning or losing in a broader arc. It's all just an instantial thing. And thinking about the ongoing campaign, you do need to have variety in that as well. Some of it needs to be story stuff. Some of it needs to be, just instantial stuff. Some of it needs to be advancing the, the dungeon crawl aspect. Some of it needs to be building up in town, and letting the players have a chance to get a break from whatever the one thing is. Variety is the spice of life, as the saying goes, and same thing goes for long-term campaigns. You can't. I don't, or I shouldn't say I can't, or you can't. If that's the kind of campaign that you and your group really love playing, that's great, but I find that for this particular group, we need to have variety, and sometimes that's a variety in tone or setting or whatever. And sometimes it's also variety in systems, like I'm very fortunate to have a group of players who happily, will jump into the same characters, or a same setting that they know and are familiar with, but just seen through a different lens, And it's fun because it gives us a chance to both try out different games without abandoning our overarching campaign, and also give a chance to see how those games, see the kind of stories that those types of games emphasize and the themes that they emphasize. If you've been a regular viewer of our Barrowmaze game, you'll see how those Shadow the Demon Lord sessions feel way different from our, Scarlet Hero sessions, as opposed to our, Pathfinder sessions. They're all very, have different flavor to them. And what that means is that the overarching story, which is the experiences that these players are going through, that is emerging as they make their decisions and go and do things, that is what becomes our campaign. That's the story of our campaign. And so that leads me, I guess, to my priorities for the campaign. So I've been streaming now on the channel for a couple of years, and I love doing it. I love interacting with people. I've met some terrific people who have been viewers, who have joined the games and have become friends, and that's one of the reasons why I stream all my games, because I love getting that added benefit of meeting people and getting to learn more about how other people run games, and it makes me a better gamer and better DM, and just it's my favorite hobby, and it's a chance to share that experience with new people. In addition, I have found in the past, when I want to learn a game, I love watching actual plays to see how people run them, and to help me figure out whether it's a game I want to run. So, and that's often why I shoot some of these types of videos, and why I often give, context for what's going on in our sessions. I mean, not as often as I should probably, but at least some. So I'm hoping that, while we're playing, I am cognizant of the viewers at home. But the thing is that my priority, as it always is for DMs, I think everywhere, my first priority is to make sure the players are having a good time. I want to make sure the players are getting out of it exactly what they're expecting, and that isn't to say that they know what's going to happen in the game, but they know that I'm going to try and make sure they have as much fun, me knowing them, knowing the game, knowing whatever else, that they're going to have as good of a time as I can possibly offer. And that doesn't necessarily always make for the best viewing, right? I mean, unfortunately, if you're serving one master, sometimes it's at the expense of another. And for instance, that's one of the reasons why I don't include any we try to interact with chat when, there is a live chat, but I don't offer ways to have the viewers, change things in the game, or present new challenges or stuff like that in the course of play, because again, my first priority is to the players. And in a similar way for the Barrowmaze campaign, if the players are choosing to have their characters go and do something different, in a given session, I'm going to let them chase that down because they're having fun, and it's in the context of the game. If my players decided to pick up and go to some main city or something like that, and move away from the Barrowmaze, well, then those characters are going to go off and do something else. And because the campaign is about the Barrowmaze, they're going to come in. But my obligation, or at least my what not obligation, but like what my requirement for the players is not that they explore the Barrowmaze every session and we continually reveal more and more of, you know, Gillespie's super cool dungeon. It's that we make the best use out of this product to give them the best experience that they can. And if the players are choosing to do other things than you know, than just continue to push into the dungeon, then that's just what we're doing. Now, as context as well, one of the reasons why we haven't seen a lot of progress in the last, like, say, month and a half in the actual dungeon is because our Fridays, it's been difficult to get people who are available to play on Fridays. Fridays are our 4-hour sessions. 4 hours gives you a lot more time to explore a lot more of the dungeon. And in the 2-hour sessions, it's a little more challenging, you know, in particular if you run into random encounters. If you run into random encounters in the, you know, in the swamp, that can often chew up time, which means that if by the time you get to the Barrowmaze, you don't have a lot of time to, and there's also restock in the Barrowmaze as well, too. You roll for restock, and you may encounter things in the Barrowmaze before you ever get to the new area to explore. And you know, I have talked to the players about that, and I, you know, we could just, like, you know, hand wave that stuff and get to the Barrowmaze and whatnot. But I think that what my 2 cents was, well, that's defeating the purpose of what makes our, you know, what has made our sessions so good so far, which is the random encounters as we go along that have been progressively easier as the characters have been going up in levels too. You know, like what was terrifying encounters, like 3 ghouls, you know, when they were low level, is now like, fuck it, we'll kill those things in a minute or 2 and then make our way on. And yeah, so what I've said is like, well, no, we're not going to, for the sake of exploring more of the maze, we're not going to ignore that stuff. It just means that, you know, if you want to do that, if you really want to, you know, charge out to the Barrowmoor, get access to the Barrowmaze, and then start exploring, you really do need to be mindful of your time. But they've been good with that. You know, we had that conversation well before when this dungeon stuff came up, and thinking now from after having heard how my players enjoyed Serene, and you know, and how they're like, recently we had that diversion where they were dealing with the trolls. Those are the 2 times where we really have had, you know, more than one session where it's not been specifically just exploring the Barrowmaze, and I've had viewers who have responded. And I guess, you know, the last time I was like, oh gosh, I'm doing this wrong, so we should really be focusing on the Barrowmaze, but I'm not going to do that anymore. Like, this is called the Barrowmaze because that's what this campaign is about. You know, where we continue to use all the major NPCs in this campaign are all characters that were introduced by Gillespie. I'm just using some of them in different ways. You know, in particular, using the faction rules. So the Thorns Wild Elves, which are just sort of a background element in that, they're an actual faction in this that the players have been cultivating reputation with. The Church of St. Yig, which is a feature from his from the Barrowmaze group, that's become a more prominent, as has the Cult of the Green Man, 2 different deities that were introduced in Barrowmaze. Those are just bigger elements in here because of those faction rules. It also means that those NPCs are much more prominent in the campaign as well too. So getting to, I guess, the ending of this, and why do I so call it Barrowmaze if we're not in the Barrowmaze every time, is because the overarching story of this own ongoing campaign, it all centers around the Barrowmaze. If we're spending time where we're, you know, the players are going and doing something that is not specific to the Barrowmaze, or isn't specifically exploring that dungeon, from my perspective, that's completely fine. I don't care. That's what happens in a sandbox game. The players know that the major source of loot, of money, of you know, mysteries, of dealing with the problems that threaten Helix and the broader region, all of that stems from the Barrowmaze. But there will be times when stuff will come up and the players will have to deal with other things, like there's an element I introduced into the history of the Barrowmaze, dealing with this thing called the Guardian Barrows, and that's been a slow build over it. But I'm not interested in forcing this into being a specific story. You know, stuff is going to be happening, but it's going to be happening over the course of years. I want it to be stuff that builds slowly, because it's not, you know, when that stuff comes to manifest, it will be a it will make sense in the context of what their explorations have revealed, and it'll be in a time when they're likely going to be in a position to. It will probably put a sense of urgency on the exploration of the Barrowmaze to not just like, hey, let's go and explore this room. It's like we got to find X and deal with X, and yeah, and I've also for this particular campaign, I have planned for the long game. So there's been elements I've been introducing slowly along and then repeating them that will pay off dividends. Spoilers here as well too. So for those of you who may be playing in this game, cover your ears. But the name of the ultimate villain in this campaign is in the player's lexicon now. And that will continue to build so that when we get to the point that they deal with that is going to be a big fucking deal. And that big villain is something that is from the Barrowmaze. So for those who may be, watching the campaign, specifically to see the, Gillespie's stuff unveiled, that's, I think what you might get more satisfaction out of is just reading it, to be honest, because if what you're interested in is seeing what's in there and seeing, what kind of sinister things he's got included in there, you might get what you might be looking for more is the actual read through of the book, because it is a great dungeon. It's got, even just to learn lessons for designing your own campaigns, it's great. But in terms of a direct route through it, that's not what this campaign is, because that's not what the players are choosing to do. And I'm willing to let the players, as long as it's within the four corners of the Barrowmaze campaign, I'm happy to follow these characters to see where they go. And that probably is going to mean a trip back to Serene during the winter months, because the players have all kind of decided that's what they want to do. There's not much they can do in, there's some stuff they're going to do in Bogtown and in Ironguard Mott, which are the two other communities in the Duchy of Eric where the Barrowmaze is set. But as soon as the rains set in, they're not able to get out to the Barrowmaze. Maybe they will. Maybe they will be crazy and decide to try and brave that stuff. But then I get to crack out my, one of my favorite AD&D books, the Wilderness Survival Guide, and start making life hell for them in terms of the environmental factors. But even then, it's still built in the chassis of the Barrowmaze. And this is, again, I guess getting to, my reason for streaming as an exemplar. I think one of the things you can see in this campaign is how you can structure an emergent story and have those story frameworks, even though all you're doing is letting the players just explore stuff, and how you can make use of this style of product to do that kind of story-based game, while not racing through the story, I guess. So anyway, I hope that this answers the question of, why do I call this Barrowmaze if we're not in there? Why do we not spend more time specifically exploring the Barrowmaze? Because that's what the players are not choosing to do. I imagine that they're going to get back to that because, again, that's where they're going to find that there's more important stuff happening there, and if they really want to deal with the threats to this, they got to get down there. They got to explore more of it. And yeah, it's hard going. It's challenging to get through the swamp sometimes. And there's going to be other stuff that's going to happen, in the background. I've been alluding to events before the Forbidden Caverns of Archaea, which is, boom. This is the other second mega dungeon that Gillespie has written, and I've been laying groundwork for this to be our next campaign, because I've been talking about people being hired to deal with this giant army that is backstory to this thing. So again, not only am I building through for whatever is going to be happening in this campaign, I've already got my eye on the next thing as well. But I'm not forcing it, and I'm letting the players go where they want, because my job is to just respond to what they're doing and present a believable and whatever else world. But that's why it's about the Barrowmaze, because in my mind, this still is the Barrowmaze is the central and most dominant plot element in this particular campaign. And if the players happen to be fucking around in the Barrowmoor sometimes, or going on a lark and exploring something different, that still will ultimately bring them back to the Barrowmaze, like the Dalliance and Serene did. It's still the Barrowmaze. It's still about the Barrowmaze. So anyway, I see that there's actually a couple people in chat here. Let me quickly just see if there's any specific questions I can deal with. Yeah, thanks, Griffin. It makes I agree. Like, I'm using the Barrowmaze book, the Barrowmaze setting. So to me, I mean, what else would I call it? Barrowmaze adjacent. I don't know. Barrowmaze Redux, maybe. Maybe that's a better way of explaining it. And yeah, Arlen, R.I.P. Sir Albus. But I would not. I would not worry, as recent events in the Barrowmaze campaign have suggested, and some of my cutscenes have suggested. I think that Sir Albus will soon be back. And I guess in terms of timing, I will point out that Sir Albus's player is a player in my Starfinder campaign, and Sir Albus's player is going to be hosting our annual gaming marathon. So I will have a whole lot of time to talk to that player about what he thinks that undead Sir Albus might do. So I imagine that we'll be seeing him again fairly soon. And Arlen, that's just it too. I mean, like, I think if what Arlen had mentioned that if having an emphasis on the players, making a good game for the players makes for a better watching experience. And I guess that speaks to what like any kind of media, like what are you hoping to get out of the stream? If what you're hoping to get out of the stream is a travel log kind of journey through the Barrowmaze, that's not really what we're doing. What we're doing is actually using the product to actually run a campaign. And as with any kind of D&D product or any kind of gaming product, we have made this our own, and the campaign has really come together into a specific type of thing, and as far as the West Marches style thing has gone, boy, this has really worked out well. Like, it's the nature of how we're using. We had a bit of stumbling to start, but where we are now in terms of getting double XP for characters who are lower level, so no one's feeling penalized for having missed a couple of sessions, and how easy it is to make new characters and stuff like that. Like, it really does make for, I think, a really engaging session. I can tell you that I've seen the players talk more about the Barrowmaze and what's happening and what's going on more so in this game than any other game I've had. Because I'm not feeding story to them, and because I don't have to remind them, hey, remember what happened in last session? They know, like, okay, we're going to go and explore some shit. Probably every session we're going to pick up. We may swing by Osen's mercenary guild and hire some hirelings. And again, we actually use Greg Gillespie's random henchman generator as well for the campaign. So that's, again, part of this, campaign that's canon. For Jonathan, what Barrowmaze system we're using? We originally used the Pathfinder 2nd Edition playtest, and then we found that while that's a great game, there are things about it that don't mesh well with the style of open table play that we're playing in Barrowmaze. So we use a modified version of Kevin Crawford's Scarlet Heroes now, which is kind of like, imagine playing in heroic mode or God mode with the original, like, basic D&D. And then most recently we introduced some new characters and ran a one-shot playing Robert Schwalb's Shadow of the Demon Lord. So that's right. Boom, here. So the whole story still is about the setting, but we've been using different games to tell different, kind of mini stories within that overarching kind of product or session. If you played DCC, DCC RPG is a similar vein to this. So imagine that, but having your characters be a little more heroic, more in the cinematic mindset than the more earthy heroes you get in traditional D&D or DCC. Let's see here. But yeah, that's Griffin. You're absolutely right that it's only Gillespie's what do you call it? Forbidden Caverns of Archaea is only a couple days ride away, which is the players in our campaign saw the hirelings all dry up recently because they kept getting hired to go away. And actually, a recruiting guy came in, a diplomat from the Threshold, the main city that is around that area, to hire people to face off against this. And that's actually, again, that while I wanted to introduce that element, that was also random too, because we use monthly random events and daily random events from the AD&D Oriental Adventures book. So there's always something new happening in town to give it that feeling of a dynamic environment. So yeah, let's see here. What else we got? Any other questions here, Fred? I think Forbidden Lands on the shelf. Yeah. So Fred, Forbidden Lands is up there. I love it. But what I'm going to shoot later today, a kind of we're 3 months into 2019, so I'm going to shoot an update, and I'm going to talk about that on that video. So you may want to come back and check that one out. And Arlen asked a good question about our Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea campaign compared to the Barrowmaze one. So we regular viewers of the channel or folks new to the channel may notice that there's another one of my old school games that I run is something my camp. I don't fucking know. I own a book of it, but one of the old school games I run on the channel, as well as an Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea game. And that one differs a little bit in the sense that we do have it set up so like, it's not, it was originally intended to be a West Marches style game where it's drop in, drop out and whatever. And then we sort of started playing and we've had the same players come back almost every session. And then when we did have people who were absent, we just kind of like their characters faded in the background, or they would do something, if they had a spell that was helpful, they would do that, but then immediately go back to doing nothing because the player wasn't there. That's been great. Like, the thing I have been enjoying about that particular game and how it differs from Barrowmaze, we're always back to to town, and there are some faction stuff, but there's very minor. There's like 6 factions in total, some of which have not even, seen screen time, as it were. And there's a clear focus of dealing with Barrowmaze related stuff and exploring the Barrowmaze. That's what that whole campaign is about. But we're always back in town at the end of the session. It's been cool having a sandbox style game where you guys are going wherever you want, but it is the groups all together. For those who haven't viewed our Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea game, Reavers of Tula, the campaign we're 6 sessions in right now, and the players started we started with them washing up on a shore from a shipwreck, and they've been slowly making their way across this horrible fucking blasted tundra, trying to find their way to the main city that they were trying to reach in the beginning. And that it wasn't I wanted to do I knew I wanted to start it off with wash up on shore and make their way, to set the proper tone for dangerous survival, to really give the overland travel a real character to it, like a different character. But they've also explored a couple dungeons so far too. And it's taught me, I think, with that one that, there's nothing wrong with, if there was an opportunity for, in the Barrowmaze campaign, for the players to really like say, you know what, we're going to stock up on supplies. We're tough enough now. We're going to go and keep, we're going to overnight in the dungeons. I'd be fine with that. If we take a kind of a poll from everyone and say, who all wants to be on this expedition? Do you want to send all your characters along? And we'll just, whoever happens to be there, we'll just pick up and run with that group. It would be more difficult to do that in Barrowmaze because, we run the gamut from having 2 people playing to having 5 people or 6 people playing. Whereas the Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers game always has like 75% of the players there. It wasn't intended to require that, but that's just how it's worked out. And, so, I mean, they've been very, very different games. The Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers one has helped me understand how little stuff you really need to make for a really good and enjoyable session. Every one of our sessions feels funny and enjoyable and, satisfying, but it's really just like, dealing with the nitty gritties of survival or the things that have come to kill you, or you guys strategizing, making your way through a dungeon. Like, that's been great. And Barrowmaze, I would like to figure out how to structure Barrowmaze so there's a little more sense of satisfaction from the players for those days when they start the session, they encounter challenges going out to the Barrowmaze, and then don't feel like they've seen progression in the game. And maybe that's what I need to think of is what can I do to characterize progression in Barrowmaze as opposed to the Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers game? Because you guys are always, the closer you're getting to Tuleborg, the closer you're getting to safety, that's a sense of progression. The more treasure you find, the more things you learn about the setting of the things that are out there, or the, implied backstory. That's, I think, a sense of progression for that game. Whereas Barrowmaze, if you're constantly trying to get to the same, that's part of the reason why I've transitioned over to do some of these small little side stories and being okay with that, is because I want to give the players a sense of progression through it. That is not just, well, you didn't get any further into the dungeon, so fuck you. You didn't do anything useful in this session. There needs to be some sense of something consequential happened in the course of that, campaign or that session. So that's one way I see them different. Oh, it wasn't you. Who was that? Sorry, Arlen. Who asked that question? Oh, so it was Griffin. Sorry, Griffin. I misattributed your question. So anyway, that's there's some other chat, but honestly, if I start going back and forth with the very good people in chat, I'm never going to end this, and I need to order pizza for my son, so I need to wrap this sucker up. But anyway, what I will do is I'll go through the chat, and then if there's stuff that I can address in there, I'll either come back and address this in a subsequent video, or I'll deal with it on my podcast, on the Dungeon Musings podcast, available on fine podcasting platforms everywhere. But anyway, I hope this answers the questions that that have cropped up about why I'm running the Barrowmaze, why I'm calling it Barrowmaze, why I've how I've structured the campaign, why you might see us try other game systems out to see how the setting that we know looks through those lenses. Like I think what we might do is definitely go back to Shadow of the Demon Lord, because the overwhelming response from the players was, wow, that was fucking great. And then what I'll do is what will happen for the players is those characters will shine more light on what's going on overall. I've done that once so far with I ran a one-shot in the Barrowmaze for an online convention where I had a bunch of people who don't play in the regular campaign come in and play, but all that shit that happened in that was all story stuff that had consequence on the broader Barrowmaze campaign. And I might do that as well too, just to try and shake things up a bit. It may make for a little less. I know. I mean, I guess for the viewers as well too. That also gets you to learn more about the Barrowmaze and see more of the content, because every time I do run one of those one shots, I most often use the random crypt generator stuff that's in Barrowmaze that doesn't actually have a specific use in the game as written. So anyway, as always. First off, thanks for everyone who in chat who asked questions throughout this as well too. That's been really that's cool. I mean, that's again another part of the fun thing with streaming is getting a chance to interact with other gamers. People who they're presumably watching your stream because they actually enjoy the same kind of material you do. So that's been awesome. But if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns regarding the Barrowmaze campaign in general, or my comments here, please don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section below, and I will endeavor to respond in a timely fashion. Alternatively, you can reach me on Twitter, where I'm progressively becoming more and more active, because it's a real problem for my ADD stuff. So you can reach me on there. And as well too, if you want a more something that's beyond 140 characters or whatever the limit is now, you can reach me on Gmail. And my email address is dungeonmusings@gmail.com. So that's kind of it. I mean, that's sort of the primer for a Barrowmaze, or for my explanation of, I guess, the campaign and why I'm running it the way I am and why I'm calling it what I am. But I hope that has helped understand and give some context for what the bigger picture is with this campaign and my plans going forward with it. Otherwise, folks, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for joining in the chat. And until next time, happy gaming.